The only remedy against totalitarianism and mass formation is the act of sincere speech. The people who are not in the grip of the mass formation, which is the majority, because it's only 20 to 30% which is really hypnotized. Like, mass formation is identical to mass hypnosis. It is mass hypnosis. I could go into that in a technical way, but it would take us too far, I think. But once you understand that it's technically speaking a mass hypnosis, and that only 20 to 30% of the people fall prey to it, then you could see that the only solution is that the people who do not fall prey to it continue to speak out in a sincere way. Like, not in an aggressive way, not trying to convince the other, because that doesn't work. Much more important than trying to convince the other is just testifying to what you feel inside. Saying like, look, you do believe in this narrative. Okay, you can do that. But to me, it feels wrong. And I will try to articulate what I feel inside and why to me this doesn't feel right. So Gustave Le Bon in the 19th century mentioned that already, that when a major mass formation emerges in a society, there is always a part of the population that doesn't fall prey to it, a major part. And of this, like 70, 80% of the people who do not fall prey to it, a very small percentage, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 10%, is willing to speak out because they feel it's dangerous. And only a small percentage of the people is willing to speak out. And when these people speak out, when these people try to wake up the masses, Gustave Le Bon said, they will typically notice that they don't succeed in waking up the masses, that the masses continue to weigh into the narrative. But, he said, the fact that they cannot wake up the masses doesn't mean that their voice has no effect. It has an effect. It makes sure that the masses do not go to the last stage of the mass formation, where the masses typically destroy each and every one who doesn't go along with them. So that's why it is so important to continue to speak out. If you continue to speak out, if enough people, a few percentage, don't have to be that many, continue to speak out, they will prevent the masses from going to the last stage, where the masses destroy each and everyone who doesn't go along with them, and finally also themselves. So when people continue to speak out, the last very destructive phase will be avoided.
That's one important point, because a lot of persons told us during the COVID, and that all what we did to resist the narrative was useless, and the agenda was still going on. And I can't help but thinking that if we hadn't done what we did, it would have been much worse. And we knew this moment where maybe the army could enter in the schools and mandatory vaccination for all the kids. It was that close, I think.
It was that close.
Yeah.
They were really building camps. They had these plans to build camps for the non-vaccinated. Like a lawyer in New York showed me everything about that, and he said like we were that close to the point where the people who didn't want to go along with what happened were referred to camps. Oh.
And so the demonstration on Saturday morning, all the people trying to sing together, make music in Quebec, in France, and in Germany, in Belgium, I think it was really much important, and we should not think that it was useless. Most of there's a kind of a natural history in this mass formation and totalitarianism, and there's a very close connection between this mass hypnosis and totalitarianism. It's not two different. They cannot live together, separated, I mean. And what's the natural history of the end of totalitarianism? Is there kind of a natural collapsing of it? Is it at one moment it's disappearing, the narrative is over, yes. Nobody buys it anymore, or because for the moment we can see kind of an echo of the first mass formation, and just like when you have a movement of earth, or a volcano, you have replics, we say in French, I don't know the name in English, but it's doing it again several times. And we saw COVID, we saw Ukraine, we saw Gaza, we saw there's climate change and things like that. The mass formation is continuing whatever the narrative is. It doesn't depend on the narrative. It's just a pretext, but the mass hypnosis is still going on.
No, of course. So, and it's very, from a psychological point of view, it's clear why it's continuing. Like because in order for a major mass formation to emerge, you need a lot of lonely people. Okay, that's what you need. Like a lot of disconnected people. That's why mass formations have always existed. Like the Crusades and stuff were examples of mass formation, or the witch hunts in the 17th century were examples of it. But they were much smaller and shorter lived. Like they didn't last that long. And now, since the 19th century, mass formations became bigger, larger, stronger, lasted longer, and that's exactly why they could become the basis of a completely new state system, the totalitarian state. So totalitarian states did not exist before the 20th century because the mass formations didn't last long enough to build a state system on it. And now they last longer and longer. And the point is, like, that's because of the percentage of lonely people that is increasing. There are more and more lonely people, more and more profound disconnectedness, and that's why the mass formations become stronger. But the problem is that every mass formation creates even more loneliness. Okay, so it prepares the ground for the next mass formation, which usually might be a little bit stronger and more aggressive. And that's what you could see, like in 2022, suddenly the war in Ukraine started, and like from one day to the other, the corona narrative lost its psychological power. It was replaced by a new narrative. Psychologically speaking, all the anxiety that was first connected to the corona narrative was switched and was attached to Putin or the Russians. So that's why. So, and when will it stop? Of course, it's a good question. When mass formations in totalitarian states are always intrinsically self-destructive. Okay, so that's the good news. They are intrinsically self-destructive. But of course, the challenge is that the point is that they should destroy themselves before they destroy the people who do not go along with them. And that's the fatal mistake that happened in Germany and in Russia. The people who resisted the system at a certain moment, 1930, in the Soviet Union, 1935, in Nazi Germany, at a certain moment they decided to go underground and to stop speaking out in public space. And that's the point where the totalitarian system becomes completely destructive, because there is no dissonant voice anymore that disturbs the hypnosis. So that's happened in 1930. The resistance stopped to speak out in the Soviet Union. Within 6 months, the destruction campaign started. In 1935, exactly the same in Nazi Germany. So there was emerging totalitarianism at many other places in the world. And there, it didn't continue. It didn't develop into a fully fledged mass totalitarian state. Probably, there are several reasons. Like countries have to be large enough for a totalitarian system to be able to emerge. But even countries that were large enough, sometimes or usually, the totalitarian system did not really go to the final stage, or did not really emerge, and probably because there were people who continued to speak out. So that's what we have to learn from history. Stopping to speak out and going underground is not a solution. Of course, you can go underground to a certain extent, and it's good to form parallel networks. Perfect. Something that has to happen. But not in a way to hide what you are doing, strangely enough. It's the most important thing is that, and definitely, it should definitely not lead to a situation where people stop to speak out in public space. That's the most important thing. Continue to speak out in a polite, calm way, not trying, or at least everyone has his own style, but usually, aggressive behavior, also verbal behavior, will be counterproductive. It's like an unwavering, stable, determined, sincere speech from the soul that is most effective against totalitarianism. That's probably, you can, if you look at it from a different perspective, like for instance, mass formations and totalitarianism in the end are the logical consequence of our rationalist, materialist view on man and the world. Yes? And this materialist view on man and the world, which believes that the human being is merely a material, biochemical entity, which it absolutely isn't, but in the materialist view of man and the world, people believe that. That's what this view on man and the world says. There is no space for ethical awareness there. Like, ethical awareness is just stupid. It's like when the human being is a merely biochemical entity, in most cases, people will conclude from that ideology that life is a relentless struggle to survive at the material level. And in this relentless struggle to survive, ethical awareness is just something problematic. You don't need it. It will make you weaker on the battlefield if you have ethical awareness. And so the solution to totalitarianism is at the same time the solution to materialism. It's finding an alternative way to look at man and the world, which is not materialist, and which places ethical awareness in the center of our existence, where it belongs. In the end, in the final analysis, contrary to what the materialist view on man and the world believes, I believe we are ethical beings. And I believe that our existence will only make sense if we acknowledge that we are ethical beings. If we get out of our bed in the morning, the first thing we have to ask ourselves is not, what is the smartest thing I can do today? The first thing we should ask ourselves is, what is the best thing I can do today in an ethical sense? Where can I do something good today? Where can I mean something?